How does an entire village decide to leave? Not a family, not a handful of desperate men looking for work. An entire community, grandparents, infants, the blacksmith, the schoolmaster, the pastor, the woman who has never traveled more than 10 miles from the church she was baptized in. All of them, packing what they can carry, selling what they cannot, walking away from land their family has farmed for 400 years, and boarding a boat toward a place none of them has ever seen. It happened, over and over, across the German-speaking lands of Europe in the 1700s. Whole villages emptied. Church registers in the Rhineland simply stop, mid-page, because there was no one left to record. And the extraordinary part is not that they left, it is where they went. Because they did not scatter. They did not spread themselves evenly across the 13 colonies. Village after village, congregation after congregation, from regions hundreds of miles apart, all pointed at the same place on the map, Pennsylvania. Between 1683 and 1783, more than 100,000 German-speaking immigrants poured into British North America, and the overwhelming majority of them funneled through a single port, Philadelphia, into a single colony. By 1745, more than 40,000 Germans lived in Pennsylvania alone. That is not coincidence. That is a system. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly how it worked. Because if your family is Pennsylvania Dutch or German American, or if your surname turns up in the church records of Lancaster, Berks, Montgomery, or Lehigh County, you are the product of that system. 12 reasons. 1 colony. Let's go back to the beginning. Number 12. A Quaker walked across Germany and made a promise. In 1677, an English Quaker named William Penn traveled through Holland and the German Rhineland. He was not a merchant and he was not a diplomat. He was a religious dissenter, and he went looking for other religious dissenters. He found an enormous audience. In 17th century Europe, most states required their subjects to follow an official state religion. If you belonged to a minority sect, Mennonite, Quaker, Schwenkfelder, Dunker, Moravian, you lived under constant pressure, fines, imprisonment, forced baptism of your children, and in some territories, the denial of Christian burial for your dead. Penn told them about a colony, his colony, a place where the government would not dictate your faith. 4 years later, in 1681, Penn acquired the land from King Charles II in settlement of a debt owed to his father. And then he did something no other colonial proprietor did with the same intensity. He advertised. He published promotional pamphlets in German. He sent agents through the Rhine Valley. He personally solicited German settlers. Historians call Penn's colony the Holy Experiment. What it functioned as, in practical terms, was the first mass marketing campaign in American history, aimed squarely at Germany's persecuted religious minorities. If your German ancestors ended up in Pennsylvania rather than Virginia or New England, this is the beginning of the reason. Somebody came to their village and made them an offer. On October 6, 1683, an English ship called the Concord docked at Philadelphia after a 75-day crossing. On board were 13 Mennonite families from Krefeld, a town in the western Rhineland near the Dutch border. They were met by a young German lawyer named Francis Daniel Pastorius, who had arrived that August. Pastorius had come representing a company of wealthy German pietists in Frankfurt, whose grand settlement plans had collapsed. Instead of the colony he had been sent to build, he found 13 families with nothing, and together they founded a settlement 6 miles north of Philadelphia. They called their first settlement Armentown, Town of the Poor. It became Germantown. Pastorius became its first burgomaster in 1689 and established a school system. Within a generation, Germantown had a wide central avenue lined with fruit trees, a market, a cemetery, and mills. As it grew, its people founded surrounding tracts they named after home: Kriegsheim, Sommerhausen, Krefeld. Only about 300 Germans came in this first phase. In raw numbers, it was almost nothing. But that is not what made it matter. Germantown proved the offer was real. It gave every German family in Europe a specific, verifiable address of people who had gone, survived, and were living under their own German-speaking leadership. Every mass migration needs a first group who make it. Germantown was the proof. These two belonged together because they arrived together, and between them they emptied the Rhineland. First, the war. The southwest of Germany, the Palatinate, the Rhine Valley, Alsace, Baden, had the worst geography in Europe. It sat directly on the invasion route between France and the German states. The 30 Years' War had already devastated the region in the 17th century, killing an enormous proportion of the population. And in the early 1700s, the War of the Spanish Succession sent French armies overrunning the German southwest all over again. For families in these villages, war was not an event. It was a climate. Armies came through, took the harvest, burned what they could not carry, and left. Then they came back. Then came the winter. The winter of 1708 to 1709 was the coldest in Europe in 500 years. Historians call it the Great Frost. Vineyards froze, fruit trees split open, livestock died in the fields. The crop failure that followed produced famine across the Rhineland, and in 1709 the dam broke. Thousands of people simply walked out of their villages and streamed down the Rhine toward Rotterdam. They came from over 250 German villages, drawn from a band of territory roughly 160 kilometers wide, centered on Wiesbaden. Nassauers, Hessians, Hanauers, Württembergers, Palatines, Alsatians. History lumps them together under one label, the Palatines, even though many of them were not from the Palatinate at all. It was the first mass migration of German speakers to colonial America, and it was driven by a simple, brutal calculation: stay and starve, or leave. If your family story includes an ancestor who left the Palatinate, this is very likely the moment. War made the region unlivable. The Great Frost made it unsurvivable. Economic desperation explains why people left. It does not explain why they left together, as whole congregations in organized groups with their ministers. That was religion. Consider the Schwenkfelders, a small pietist group whose beliefs trace to the 16th century reformer Caspar Schwenkfeld. For roughly 2 centuries they were persecuted in southern Germany and Lower Silesia. Fines, imprisonment, property seizure. In Harpersdorf in Silesia, a Catholic chapel was built with money extracted from Schwenkfelder families as punishment. Their fines turned into a church they were not welcome in. They were denied the right to Christian burial. By the 1720s, they were refugees inside Europe, sheltering on the estate of a Saxon nobleman, Count Nikolaus Ludwig von Zinzendorf, at Herrnhut and Bertelsdorf. They lived there 6 to 8 years. Then came the order to leave. And here is the detail that shows exactly what kind of group this was. When the expulsion order came, the Schwenkfelders did not petition to have it withdrawn. They did not negotiate. They immediately began writing letters and sending representatives to find a new home, with one condition running through everything they asked for. They wanted somewhere they could live their faith freely and settle together in one area. Not scatter. Together. That is the difference between an economic migrant and a religious congregation. One goes where the work is. The other goes where the whole community can go and arrives intact. By the 1720s, moving Germans across the Atlantic had become a business, and businesses need salesmen. They were called Neulanders. Typically, these were men who had already crossed to America, often as servants themselves, and had come back to Europe to collect family or possessions. Shipping firms paid them a commission for every passenger they delivered to the docks at Rotterdam. The Neulander would arrive in a village dressed expensively, visibly prosperous, living proof of what America had done for him. He would describe a land of extraordinary fertility, cheap land, no state church, no lord taking a share of your harvest. Migrants later testified they had been promised free transport, food, pocket money, and land and livestock on arrival. Much of it was exaggerated. Some of it was outright false. And because the Neulander was paid per head, he had no financial reason to explain the risks accurately. They were effective enough that competition became fierce. Several colonies sent recruiters into the Rhineland to compete for German settlers: Georgia, Massachusetts, Nova Scotia, New York, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Recruiting agents fought each other for the same villages. This is a critical piece of the answer to our question. Village-scale departures did not usually begin with the villagers. They began with a man who walked in wearing a good coat. Here is the mechanism that made mass German migration possible, and it is the darkest part of the story. Most of these families could not afford the passage. A transatlantic crossing was expensive, and the whole reason they were leaving was that they had nothing. So the shipping trade invented a solution. It was called the Redemptioner system, and it emerged in the Rotterdam to Philadelphia route in the 1720s before becoming standard. The arrangement was this: you sailed now and paid later. On arrival in Philadelphia, you had a short window, one contract stipulated 2 weeks, to produce the fare. If a relative already in America redeemed you by paying your passage, you walked off free. If nobody came, the captain was entitled to sell your labor to recover the debt. You would then be bound to whoever bought your contract, typically for 4 to 7 years, depending on your age. More than half of German-speaking immigrants in the 1700s and early 1800s came this way. In the peak years between 1749 and 1754, when nearly 60,000 Germans reached North America, as many as half were redemptioners. And notice what this system did that other forms of indenture did not. It allowed entire families to travel together. British indentured servants typically signed contracts individually before departure, negotiated in front of a magistrate with some legal protection. Redemptioners negotiated on the ship, at the end of the voyage, at the worst possible moment, sick, exhausted, and desperate to get off. The danger was severe. Families who could not pay risked being sold separately at the dock. Parents watched buyers bid for their children, but it meant a family could sail, and a family that could sail meant a village could sail. We should be honest about what the journey actually was, because the families who reached Pennsylvania were the survivors of it. The route ran from the Rhineland down the river to Rotterdam, then across to an English port, then across the Atlantic. The river journey alone could take weeks, with tolls at every territorial boundary. Then the crossing, commonly 2 to 3 months. Conditions on the ships were dire: overcrowding, contaminated water, spoiled food, dysentery, typhus. Before the 1750s, vessels carried around 185 passengers. As demand surged, ships were refitted to carry an average of 300. Gottlieb Mittelberger, a German organist who made the crossing and then returned home specifically to warn people, wrote a detailed account of the voyage and the redemptioner trade. He described conditions so severe that his book stands as one of the great warnings of the era. Children suffered the worst mortality. Many families arrived having buried someone at sea. Here is why this matters for our question. This voyage was survivable in a group. Villages traveling together could nurse each other's sick, mind each other's children, and share what food they had. And when they landed, they had witnesses, people who knew who they were, who could vouch for them, who would help them find land. The crossing punished the isolated and rewarded the collective. It selected for exactly the kind of migration this video is about. Before we go further, if this is the kind of history you want more of, subscribe to Legacy Remains. We uncover the stories hidden inside the names people carry. Hit subscribe, and the next one is already waiting. This is the single most important mechanism in the entire story. Historians call it chain migration, and it is the direct answer to why entire villages ended up in the same colony. It works like this. A few families leave a village and settle successfully in Pennsylvania. They write home. The letter is not private. A letter from America is an event. It gets read aloud in the tavern, passed between farms, carried to the next village, read from the pulpit. That letter contains something no recruiter's promise could match. A name you trust, describing a specific place with practical instructions. The next year, more families from that same village leave, aiming at the exact spot the letter came from. They arrive to find people who speak their dialect, know their family, and can help them get established. Then they write home. The effect compounds. A trickle becomes a stream, and the stream runs from one specific German village to one specific Pennsylvania county. Not because of any plan, but because every new departure was following a personal connection. The redemptioner system reinforced it. The original meaning of redemptioner came from early German settlers arranging to redeem relatives off arriving ships by paying their passage on the dock. Your cousin in Lancaster County could quite literally buy your freedom the day you landed. That is an enormous incentive to sail to Philadelphia rather than anywhere else. By 1819, the pattern had become formalized. People who had crossed in earlier waves were returning to their home villages, specifically to recruit more migrants. If you have ever wondered why so many Pennsylvania Dutch families seem to trace back to the same small cluster of German villages, this is why. They were not following a map, they were following each other. Everything so far explains why Germans left and how they traveled. This explains why they stayed and why the letters home were enthusiastic enough to empty villages. Southeastern Pennsylvania has some of the finest agricultural land in eastern North America, deep limestone soils, reliable rainfall, and a climate not unlike the Rhinelands. For a family from a region where farmland had been subdivided among heirs for generations until the plots were too small to feed anyone, this was overwhelming. And German farmers were exceptionally good at exploiting it. They had a reputation, recorded by contemporaries, for choosing land by soil quality rather than convenience, for building substantial barns before substantial houses, and for farming in a way designed to hand the land to the next generation rather than exhaust it in one lifetime. The settlement pattern shows the chain in action geographically. From Germantown, Mennonite families spread northwest to Skippack in what is now Montgomery County and north to the Swamp in Bucks County. After 1710, they pushed to Conestoga in what became Lancaster County. Jost Haidt, a Palatine who arrived in Pennsylvania in 1718, later formed a land development company and in 1731 led a group of Germans down the Great Wagon Road into the lower Shenandoah Valley in Virginia. That is how the pattern replicated. A cluster establishes itself, fills up, and sends an organized group to found the next cluster, carrying the same names, the same dialect, and the same church. Here's the factor that separates Pennsylvania from every competing destination, and it is the reason the recruiters from Georgia and Nova Scotia lost. Penn permitted the German settlers to live in their own homogeneous German-speaking communities, under their own German-led religious and political leadership. Think about what that meant to a Schwenkfelder family whose entire negotiating position was that they wanted to settle together in one area. Pennsylvania did not merely tolerate that, it permitted it structurally. The result was a German-speaking world inside a British colony, towns with German names, Mannheim, Berlin, German-language printing presses, German churches, schools, and courts of local opinion. The Ephrata Cloister, a German religious community in Lancaster County, printed the Martyr's Mirror in the 1740s, the largest book published in colonial America, produced in German for German readers. And the religious diversity was extraordinary. Mennonites, Quakers, Moravians, Dunkers, Schwenkfelders, Lutherans, Reformed, and some Catholics. Historians sometimes divide them into sect people and church people. Groups that had been at each other's throats in Europe were neighbors in Pennsylvania. This is the compounding advantage. The more Germans who arrived, the more German the colony became. And the more German the colony became, the easier it was for the next village to come. Language was not a barrier. Your pastor was already there. That is how a colony becomes a magnet rather than merely a destination. Everything in this video has been building to a single insight, and the Schwenkfelder migration of 1734 is the clearest proof of it that exists. In 1734, roughly 200 Schwenkfelders undertook a 5-month trek from Herrnhut in Upper Lusatia to Pennsylvania. They traveled in stages, first in small groups to Pirna, southwest of Dresden, then onward, then down to Rotterdam, then across the Atlantic on the ship St. Andrew. They landed in Philadelphia on September 22, 1734. Now consider what happened next, because this is the detail that reveals everything. Their leader was a man named George Weiss. His wife, Anna Meschter Weiss, had survived the entire 5-month journey, the trek across Saxony, the river passage, the Atlantic crossing, and died. He buried her in Philadelphia on September 23rd, the day after they landed. And on September 24th, one day after burying his wife, George Weiss led the group in a service of thanksgiving for their safe arrival. They called it the Gedächtnistag, the Day of Remembrance. It has been observed every single year since, on September 24th, or the Sunday closest to it. The descendants of those families still gather. That is nearly 3 centuries of unbroken observance, beginning with a man who had just put his wife in the ground in a country he had been in for 1 day. This is the answer to the question this video started with. Entire villages left Germany for the same American colony because they were never really emigrating as individuals at all. They moved as congregations, as kinship networks, as communities that had already survived generations of persecution together in Europe. The village was the unit, not the person. And that is also why the pattern held so tightly on the American side. When you migrate as a community, you arrive as one. You settle together, you worship together in your own language, you marry within the group, you bury your dead in the same ground, and you write letters home that bring the next 100 people to the exact same county. Between 1683 and 1783, more than 100,000 German-speaking people came from the Palatinate, Württemberg, Hesse, Alsace, Lorraine, and the Swiss cantons of Basel, Bern, and Zurich. The overwhelming bulk of them came through Philadelphia. Between 1727 and 1775 alone, roughly 65,000 landed there, with the peak between 1749 and 1754. They were not 100,000 individuals who happened to choose the same place. They were hundreds of villages, moving in chains, each one following someone it already trusted. 12 reasons, one colony, and a pattern so strong that you can still see it on a map today. Drive through Lancaster, Berks, Montgomery, or Lehigh County in Pennsylvania, and you are driving through the geography of 18th century German villages, reassembled 3,000 miles from where they started. The barns are German. The place names are German. The surnames in the graveyards are German. And in some communities, a dialect of German, Pennsylvania Dutch, is still spoken, 300 years after the ships landed. Those families crossed an ocean in the hold of a wooden ship, sold years of their own labor to pay for it, buried their dead at sea, and walked off the dock at Philadelphia owing money to a stranger. And they did it together, because that was the only way any of them believed it could be done. If your surname is German, and your family has been in America since the colonial period, you are looking at the end of one of those chains. Someone in your line read a letter from a cousin, or listened to a Neulander in a good coat, or sat in a church and heard that the congregation had decided to go. So tell me in the comments, what is your German surname, and which county did your family land in? Lancaster? Berks? Montgomery? Somewhere further west? I want to see how many of these chains are still traceable in the people watching this. Subscribe to Legacy Remains. Another name, another bloodline, another history that nobody told you was yours.